let's add some basic animations in Unity. Alright, we found this back in Unity once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding basic animations in Unity here for, in this case, our ballista. You can definitely follow this with a custom project. However, if you want to follow along step by step with the exact same project, you can download the Unity package in the description below, and let's get started. So first things first, we actually want to enable two different new windows. For that, we want to go to Windows, we want to go to Animation, and we want to get the animation, which might open in a window like this. I'm just going to put this under the console right here so that it's at the same position. And then I also want to go to Window, Animation, and then the animator. That might open anywhere. I personally like to put it right here. You don't have to, but we basically need the animation as well as the animator window. Once we have that, there's many different ways to start getting an animation to work. Now, what we could do, for example, the shooting ballista right here, you can see that it actually is multiple different sprites at the same time. And what you could do is when you select all of them, so I select the first one, hold shift and select the last one. If I were to drag multiple sprites into the hierarchy, you can see it immediately wants to create an animation out of this. So that is very, very interesting. And we're actually going to do this. So in the assets folder, I'm just going to create a new folder though. I'm going to call this the animations. And then inside of there, this is going to be the animation. Now, the animation is going to be sort of a timeline on changes that happen to your game object. This can be the sprite, so the texture basically, but it could also be the position, the scale, the rotation. You can basically change almost any component on that particular game object. So in this case, we could call this the ballista shooting. Well, because in this case, this would be the entire animation for shooting the ballista. So I'm going to call this ballista underscore shooting. You can call this whatever you like, really, but just so that we know what this is. I'm going to save this now. It has added a new game object right here. And if I'm just going to move this, what you will find is that I can go to the animation tab and you can see it has selected the ballista shooting animation. So this is the animation that we can see right now. And if I were to play this, we can see this actual game object change. So you can see this changes, which is really cool already. So we actually already have, something there. And this is a timeline. So you can see I can move this about right here. If I drag this, I can basically move the time and what is being displayed right here. And you can see we're changing the sprite, right? So on the left right here, we can add different properties and different things that are going to change. In this case, what is going to change is the sprite renderer sprite right here. And we're changing it from ballista 0 to in one frame, then display sprite underscore 1, and then sprite underscore 2, and then sprite underscore 3, and then 4, and then here we end, and then we loop back around. So you can zoom in and out by just scrolling. And what you can then do, for example, is you can select multiple of these keyframes. Those are called keyframes, and you can move them about, right? So for example, maybe, I want there to be like a little bit of a delay between some of them. And now you can see it looks a little bit different. So that is a thing where you will have to play around with this, especially if you have any type of custom animations. This is going to be a thing where you will have to try out a lot of different options and timings and all of that. Now, if we once again go down to the project in our animations folder that we've created, we actually have two different things. Number one is the shooting ballista. This is the name of the animator, right? So this is, as you can see at the top over here, this is the animator controller, while this is the actual animation. And this was the easiest way to create the animation. There are other ways that you can create an animation, of course. And what we can then now do, because we already have our custom ballista that we actually want to use, I'm just going to delete this game object. And to our already existing ballista, I'm now going to add the animator component. You can see there is no controller right here. However, I can just drag this controller in here. And all of a sudden, if I now go to the animation again and run this, you can see all of a sudden now our big ballista works like this. Exactly the same way as the small one. So that would be one way that you can add an animation. You can also add an animation by going to the animation tab and then just adding a new clip. So a clip is basically an animation. So those are time-sensitive changes to any type of property on your game object. That's the idea of an animation. While an animation controller right here, this is the thing that was interesting in the animator. So if we now go to the last window that we've added, this is the animation controller in the animator tab. And this is really interesting because this one displays what type of animation clips are being displayed at what time. So a game object can have multiple animations. That would make sense, right? For example, if you think of Mario, for example, Mario can have an idle animation that plays when he's not moving, and then it can have an animation that plays when he's walking. And these transitions between these animations are actually quite important. So we can think about this for just a moment. Okay, right now we have the ballista shooting animation, but when we actually think about this, right, if we were to play this, that's awesome. And if I actually go into the game, you can think about, well, what would happen now? Well, let's take a look. Well, this is pretty cool that the animation is playing. That is really not the animation that we want to be playing the entire time right here, right? This is not really the correct thing that we want. So what we can do is we can add a new animation. So we're just going to go to the animation tab while we selected the game object that we wanted to create the animation for. Then going in the animation tab to create new clip, we're going to make sure that we add this in the animations right here. I'm going to call this the ballista_idle because in this case, I actually want to have an idle animation, which is literally going to be actually exactly what is displayed right here, basically being nothing. So if I were to play this animation, you can see it doesn't do anything. But that's totally fine because that's actually exactly what I want from my idle animation. I don't want anything to happen over here. And in the animator, you can see that right now we're still going from the entry, right? So this is the sort of the default state. We're still going to the shooting animation right here instead of going to the idle animation. But now I'm asking you, wait a moment, is this everything that we're going to need? Because if we look back at the shooting animation, right, and we play this, there are actually 2 animations hidden in this, isn't there? This would be idle, and then this, if you think about it, would be the reloaded state, while this would be firing the bolt. Hopefully you can see sort of the difference that in this animation, there's actually 2 animations hidden in here, so to speak, quote unquote. Once again, this is a specific case for this specific animation. This might not be the case for your animation, but we have to take a look at this in an explicit example, and that is the explicit example right here. So we can actually make another animation. So we once again select the shooting ballista right here. We're going to go to the animation tab and we're going to create another new clip. And that is going to be the ballista_reloaded. And now this will actually have a change in property. And you can see here the properties, we can change them for any of the available components, including components of its child objects. This is really freaking powerful. So animations can also be used for things that are beyond just visual. You could also change things in the game world and actually affect change like that. Usually you don't necessarily want to do that, but you can. So what we want to change is the sprite right here. So we're going to expand the sprite renderer and add the sprite. And in this case, when I am reloaded, I actually don't want this sprite to be displayed. I actually want, if I'm not mistaken, sprite_3 just to display it. So I can just drag it in here and you can see now I've replaced it. And if I were to, well, play this, you can see it's interestingly enough going to reset the sprite right here, which is definitely not something I want. So I can just delete this. I can select it, press delete, and now I just have this sprite to display. And this one is a little bit of a weird thing because it only displays for 1 frame. The animation is going to cycle really often. I'm unsure if there are any disadvantages with this in terms of performance. So what I usually like to do, I usually just like to select this, press Ctrl C to copy it, and then for example at like 10 frames, just press Ctrl V to paste it in, and then we're going to have the same idea over here. You can even expand this a little bit more and say, you know what, maybe I want to keep this for like 30 frames or something like that so that it doesn't cycle too often through. Once again, I'm unsure if there are any disadvantages with that. I just don't like to have it cycle through so often. Right, so now the reloaded animation is done. We can think about the shooting animation now to include, well, wait a second. Well, we would actually, right, start here and then shoot, and then that's it. So we can select the first 3 sprites and just delete them. And I can move this up over here. So let's move this up to the normal state. And then maybe after 2 frames, I want to start shooting. And then maybe it's going to actually be pretty quick. So let's see how this one looks. So that's pretty cool. Okay, I think that would definitely work. This is not the last state, though, that we want to stop in. Because once again, if we go to the idle animation, this is actually expanded a little bit more. So we want to get back in the shooting. We actually want to get back ballista_0. And you can see this is now the resting state. And we can even do some pretty funny stuff. And maybe we can wiggle. So what we can do is we can duplicate both of these. So just select both of them, Control C to copy, and then Control V to paste them in. And now look at this. Now at the end over here, it wobbles for just a moment. Maybe we want to do something like this. Maybe this is going to look a little bit better. So once again, this is not strictly necessary, but it is kind of a funny idea to have this as well. And this is how you can play around with the animations even once you've already created. So you can still customize them quite a bit even after they are done. But now we have our 3 animations. We have the idle animation, which doesn't change anything, and it just displays the shooting ballista 0 sprite right here. Then we have the reloaded animation, which literally just displays this sprite right here. In this case, it should be the _3. And then we have the shooting ballista, and that one actually is a little more complicated. That's the one where actually things are happening. But this is pretty awesome. And once again, you could expand this to the right if you want to make this a little bit longer or anything like that. That totally works. But for the time being, this should be fine. And now we want to facilitate the transitions between these different animations. And that once again happens in the animator, but this is going to happen with some parameters. So instead of layers, we want to go to the parameters and we want to change some things there. And we can think about, okay, what types of parameters can be used? There really isn't any hard or fast rule for this. Of course, you don't want to overload this with parameters, right? So you don't want to add just like 18 different parameters if you don't need them. In our case, I'm going to be okay with having one bool here, which is going to be called loaded_bolt. This is going to be, if this is going to be true, then we want to go into the reloaded state. That is the idea. And then we have another one, which is going to be a trigger, and that is going to be the shoot trigger, which of course, when the trigger happens, then we're going to basically go from the reloaded state to the shooting state. That is the general idea, and that is pretty much everything we're going to need in this case. So let's do the transitions over here right now. Right now, when we enter into the game, the default transition goes to the shooting. This definitely is not the case. We actually, in our case, want to go to reloaded because we already have a bolt loaded in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on the entry, set state machine default, and then just click on this. And you can see now our reloaded animation is going to be the first one to be displayed. And if I were to go into the game, what we'll find is that we now are basically playing the reloaded animation the entire time. That's pretty cool. And then the question is, well, where are we going from the reloaded? Well, every time we're in the reloaded animation, we ever only want to go to the shooting animation afterwards, right? When I actually shoot the bolt. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, make transition, and we're going to drag it to the shooting and click on this. And now here comes in a very interesting thing, and that is changes in transitions. So the actual animation here has certain parameters, right? So you have a speed over here. We can mirror this. There's a bunch of things that we can change, but we can also click on the arrow and change the transition, as you can see. So there are a lot of settings that we can basically have. There are exit times, and usually what you can see here is a sort of a primitive way of showing, okay, how is this transition going to be done in terms of time? You can turn off the exit time, and then, for example, there's no exit time. It's going to complain certain things depending on what it might complain about certain things right here, but not to worry. For the time being, we actually don't want to use the exit time, and we don't even want to use the fixed duration, because in this case, we neither have an exit time nor a transition, because we want to transition this with certain conditions. And the condition here is going to be if loaded bolt is false, so we no longer have a loaded bolt, and we also want to make sure that the shoot trigger was actually triggered. If both of those are true, then we want to go from the reloaded animation to the shooting animation. And now the next question is, okay, how are we then going from the shooting animation to the idle animation? Because once again, that is the only transition that makes sense. So once again, we're going to right click on this, make transition, go to the idle animation, and then click on the arrow once again. And in this case, this is actually going to be an interesting one, because once we're finished with the shooting animation once, I actually want to immediately transition to the idle animation. So what we can do then is we can say it actually does have an exit time, and the exit time is 1. So basically we're playing the animation once in its entirety, and there's no fixed duration. We're going to put this to 0 and say there is no fixed duration. We're only going to play the animation here once, the shooting animation, and then immediately transitioning to the idle animation without any sort of fading or any like that, because in this case, I actually want to immediately transition to the idle animation, because that's exactly how this is going to, well, look like properly as well. And then lastly, the last transition is from idle to reloaded again. So we're going to right click the idle animation, make transition to the reloaded, and we can think about, okay, what do we want to basically have here? Well, in this case, we once again do not want any fixed duration. We want no exit time. The only thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the loaded bolt is equal to true, because in this case, when we load a bolt, then we're in the reloaded animation, and that is fine. Hopefully the logic here makes sense. Of course, it can be way more complicated than this when you have like giant trees. Sometimes they are really not necessary. However, in this case, this is, basic animations over here. And I think 3 animations and a couple of transitions should be okay and sort of understandable. Now, the real question, though, is that you might ask, well, how are we now getting the differences over here, like the parameters? How are we getting those changed? And that is an awesome question. Now we're going to do this with a script. Now there are plenty of ways to do this. So we could, for example, go in our already existing shooting script and just add the animator right here and then change things in the animator. I highly, highly recommend against that, simply because of the fact that then you're coupling your animations really tightly to the shooting of a ballista. And usually you don't want this tight of a coupling. Now the really uncoupled way would be to do this with events. Basically every time I'm shooting, I'm calling an event, and then an animator script looks for that event and basically it's like, oh, this event was fired, so now I have to change some stuff. We're not going to go that far into uncoupling. I think it's a little too complicated for the exact thing that we're going to do here. What we're going to do is we're going to make a new script over here. There's going to be a new C# script, and this is going to be the ballista animations. We're going to add this script to our ballista right here. I just want to move this up over here. I just like to have all my scripts all next to each other, and we're going to open this and take a look at what we're going to do in there. Now, overall, this is actually going to be pretty straightforward. First of all, we need a reference to the animator. So this is going to be an animator, and we're going to call this animator. Absolutely awesome. In the start method, we're going to say animator is equal to exactly get component animator. So we're immediately going to get this animator component right here, wherever the ballista animations script is attached to. And then we don't need any update method, but what we will want is we want a public void shooting animation, as well as a public void reload animation. And those will actually be called in the shooting script. As I've said, this is not completely decoupled. The shooting script still knows about the ballista animations, but it doesn't have to do anything with the animator. It just is going to call the shooting and the reload animations. And then here we're basically going to say animator.setBool. And the bool that we're going to set is loaded_bolt. I'm going to set this to the value of false because the shooting animation, right? We actually want to set this to false. And then we're going to trigger the trigger. So there's going to be the set trigger. And the trigger that we want to set is going to be the shoot trigger. There you go. And then in the reload animation, we just want to say animator.setBool. This once again loaded_bolt. And this time we want to set this to true. This should all make logical sense, right? When we're reloading, we want the loaded bolt to be true. We can also think about this in this transition right here, right? This is the transition that we're sort of targeting, quote unquote. And that's exactly right. We want to go from the idle animation to the reload animation in this case. Now loaded bolt is true. That's fine. But to actually move over to the ballista over here, we actually want this to be false and shoot to fire. And that is then facilitated with the shooting animation call right here. And now in the ballista shooting, as I've said, this is a little more coupling than usually would be okay, but in this case, I think this is going to be totally fine. We're going to have a private ballista animations. We're going to call this the ballista animations. And in the start method, we're just going to say ballista animations is equal to get component of ballista animations. This is exactly right. So usually this should be the case, but once again, if you have this, then of course you can't really use the ballista shooting script without any animations, which can sometimes be a little bit annoying. That can sometimes be the detriment or positive in this like tight coupling. But then the question is, what do we need to do? Well, basically in the reload, we simply want to call the reload animations. So we just want to say ballista animations dot reload animation. And then the shoot, well, we just want to say ballista animations dot shooting animation. And that is it. So this is a pretty easy way to do this. Once again, still a little bit tightly coupled, but I'm pretty sure that this is going to be okay. And in theory, this should actually already work totally fine without any different things that we need to change. Now, we might want to change some of the timings, some of the speed of certain animations, stuff like that. That's totally fine. But let's actually go into the game and see how it looks. So we're starting in the reloaded animation. If I fire, you can see it is a little bit of a delay, and now we're in the idle animation. If I reload again, it actually does immediately switch to the reload animation, but I can fire again, and you can see this sort of works if I keep doing this. So there are a few things that we can definitely change, but overall, this is already a really cool first thing. Now, what you'll find is that the reload animation really doesn't look that good because we are immediately moving from the idle animation to the full drawn out animation. And you know what? Maybe I actually want this to draw back a little bit. So what we can do is we can actually facilitate that, no issue whatsoever. So let's say we want to go from there to, this is going to be 2 over here. So maybe I actually want I'm going to delete the last one over here so that it's going to look like this. So maybe I actually want this to look like this, but, and here comes the crazy thing. I just, honestly, I just don't want this to loop, right? I just want this to start here, go to here, here, and here, and then stay here and just stop looping. I can do that, no issue whatsoever. And the way to actually stop this from looping, fairly straightforward. In the project where you have the animation saved, you want to go and click on this. You can see now we have a loop time, and we just want to turn off the loop time, and now the reloaded animation is going to play once and it's going to stay on the last frame. And we can even take a look at this. So if I go into the game now, you can see that it sort of retracts once, and then when I fire, you can see that works as well. And if I reload now, you can see that is a much smoother way. Now, of course, the bolt immediately appears, and maybe we could do something with that as well. But overall, that is a much more satisfying sort of conclusion to the animation right here. So when it fires, the bolt is released a little bit too early for me, and also we could probably move the bolt down a little bit. So those are the, the fine-tuning elements over here that really are not necessary for a lot of stuff, but they can be quite important as well. So maybe we want this at 0.1 here in this case. Let's take a look at whether or not this is going to be a little bit situated a little bit better. No, this still needs to move down a little bit more. Do this while it is running 3.035. I'm going to do that. So we're going to go out of this and change this to 0.035. So this is going to be 0.035 is going to be where the bolt appears. And I actually want to change this in the prefab as well. So because I've changed it right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now go to the bolt. I'm going to select prefab right here, and I'm going to change it in the prefab as well. I'm going to be 0.35, and that should be totally fine. And now if I'm going to launch this, we can see that looks a little bit better. And if I shoot it, the bolt still shoots out way too fast. So we can take a look at whether or not the transition might be holding this up. It is not. As soon as I click, this transitions. So it probably is the shooting animation itself. So we can think about this. So this actually holds this particular pose for 2 frames. So you know what? Maybe I'm going to delete this, and I actually want to immediately shoot this as soon as I transition over here. So maybe this should be the shooting animation. Let's take a look if this is a little bit better. Yeah, that looks much better. So this is much better, and you can see, bam, that is almost perfect. Now, of course, you can still do many tweaks with this. For example, it reloading for the first time. Maybe you want a separate animation for that so that it doesn't always, have the entire reloading animation right here, so that it doesn't always like draw back. Maybe you want to start this at the drawn back position. All of this can be done without any issues, right? I mean, now hopefully that you have sort of the blueprint on how the animations work, how the animator works, how you can facilitate transitions between those animations. Hopefully those are the building blocks that you can take and then use for your own animations, and also play around with the animations as well. The entire finished project is of course available to you in the description below as a GitHub repository and a Unity package, so you can take a look at all of this working completely intact just like this. And if you want to have things keep working, then you can take a look at this video right here. We'll actually add custom lights in 2D in Unity. Hope to see you there. So yeah.